Okay, this is 1914 Twilight in the East. It's from GMT Games. It's a new game to hit the table. Anyone who was hoping for Axis Empires, it's just not doing it for me at the moment, I'm afraid. So Axis Empires is being retired to the awaiting to be played pool. It's not been out of the way. It's just that after doing that restart, I just really lost all impetus, and so I didn't really fancy doing it anymore. Anyway, this one is quite an old game, 2007. It was the start of a series of 3 games, but unfortunately they changed the system quite radically when they did the Western Front version and the Serbian Front version. It only covers the war from very early August 1914. Just let me check the actual start date. So it's August the 16th, so there has been quite a bit of activity in the war, but not on the Eastern Front, because it took quite a bit of effort for the armies to mobilise onto the Eastern Front. Now, if we're talking components and stuff like that, the counters are really nice. The maps are nice. It's usually business GMT standard. The rule book is a bit manky. And the playbook, they're all in black and white. There's no colour at all. They're not exactly many. Oh dear, there's trouble. My cat's just seen another cat. This is gonna go off in a bang in a minute. Yeah, the play aids aren't particularly brilliant, or sort of black text on either grey or white card. Sturdy enough card, nothing to complain about that. It was quite an expensive game in its day because it's a big game, and it hasn't received a lot of traction as far as I can see on YouTube in terms of people playing it. Though there have been a few people who have done the stuff. I don't think anyone's done the Eastern Front Grand Campaign like I'm going to do now. If we look at the game just generally, it's an oddball in a way, in the fact that it uses these off-board tracks here to monitor combat efficiency for each unit. And the disadvantage of that is, well, you can have a flexible combat efficiency system where divisions get worn down and become more and more useless, even though they've not necessarily suffered too many casualties and things. So it's a good way of monitoring that. It's also quite a clever way of keeping an eye on where everything is in terms of independent units and attachments, because I find in most games you just can't track it, and you just sort of say to yourself, well, that's an independent unit, and if it's near that HQ, that's where it's attached to, which might not actually be the case. So it's odd in that way, in the fact that virtually every unit of a certain size has a corresponding unit on these tracks. At the same time, you can have these things that you don't have steps as such, but they do have hit points on them as well, so they can be building up a certain amount of hit points. I'm not quite sure how the two mechanisms work together. I'm just sort of commenting it's quite an unusual thing. Apart from that, the other real oddity you'll see are these boundaries. You see these lines, these represent formation boundaries. That's just another way of keeping your attachments for a Fifth Army must be, say, or whatever army you're dealing with, like this one here, they must be between those boundaries, every unit that's attached. and if you cross over to the mountains, you've got to attach to another formation, or another army, which is something different. The rest of it seems relatively conventional, looking at the attack, defense, strength, movements, fortifications and stuff like that. There's artillery units, cavalry, infantry, obviously no fast moving units at all, no mechanized units. There is going to be trench warfare on this front, but nothing compared to the Western Front. Anyone who's got an idea that the Eastern Front was a stalemate, a slugfest like the Western Front, you're in for a big surprise here. This is a very, very mobile front, particularly in 1914. There's a huge amount of to and froing going on here. There's really starts off with two distinct battles or campaigns. You've got the Galician campaign in the south, which started off with an initial Austro-Hungarian move into Russia here, and you had this East Prussian campaign here, where you've got an initial Russian offensive is going to come ploughing into the German positions here, which are relatively weak. From then on, there's counter-offensives, the Russian counter-offensive against the Austro-Hungarians, and the German counter-offensive against the Russians, and then the front sort of spreads into this. There's this large gap here where there's virtually no troops at all around here in Polish salient, Russian Poland. Yeah, so it's very much a war of movement. The thing is that there's lots of troops here. There's probably as many soldiers on this front here as there were on the Western Front, but there's just too much ground to cover. You can't, you just cannot create a static line. Later on, when in about 1915, 16 and stuff, when Russian Poland fell, the front actually got a lot shorter, but it's quite a long front here because of this huge salient of Russian Poland. We're looking at other bits of oddities. I marked anything in a green. Disc is an Austrian victory point, hex, so the Russians will be trying to capture them. The ones in blue are German control, and the ones in red are the ones that are controlled by the Russians. If you see a white block, that indicates it's a supply source. If you see a yellow block, it indicates it's an HQ for an army. If you see red blocks and blue blocks, or green blocks and orange blocks, they indicate railheads. I'm not quite sure how railheads work in this game yet. I've really sort of been setting this up over the last couple of days. It's actually a tricky game to set up because of the sheer number of counters and the fact that for virtually every unit on the map has a corresponding unit on the tracks. Makes it a bugger to set up. Things about it, I haven't noticed any great errata in the setup charts. One thing I did get though is it's quite confusing, some of the setups. But these things off Board Game Geek really do help. They not only cover your incoming reinforcements, but all your releases. Units release on a schedule, starting with armies, and then there's loads of individual units that release on a schedule. There's quite a few withdrawals that take place and substitutions and everything. And this really sort of charts it all much more effectively than the black and white tables in the playbook. Right, that'll do as an introduction. It's probably going to take me a couple of days messing around, looking at the rules and stuff, and trying to get access to any sort of teaching materials that there are on this game on YouTube, etc., and see how I get on. But I think because it's such a huge game, it's one of those ones where you can probably start pushing counters around, to be quite honest, in certain areas of the front, just and see what happens. Anyway, there we are.